Are your users dropping off and you can't figure out why? Well, the problem might be invisible. It might not just be about bad design. It's about deep psychological hurdles that you are unknowingly potentially creating. Now, in this video, we're going to break down the critical difference between a cognitive load, that is the mental weight of using your product, and cognitive barriers. These are the invisible walls that stop users dead in their tracks. Understanding this is going to be the difference between the single most important shift any designer can make to make truly intuitive experiences. Look at your analytics. See that drop-off point? That abandoned cart? That half-finished form? Well, you think it's the color of the button? You think it's the font? You A/B test a dozen headlines, but the problem is deeper than that. You see, your users aren't just getting distracted, they're hitting a wall, or they're crushed by the weight they cannot see. Today, we're not talking about aesthetics, we're talking about something a bit deeper than that, something that every designer needs to understand. We're talking about two invisible forces that make or break every single user experience. That is cognitive loads and cognitive barriers. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you're never going to look at your work the same way ever again. All right, so let's get straight into it. Now, for years, we've used the phrase, "Don't make me think." And that's true. But what does it actually mean? Well, it's been simplified so much that we've lost the plot since then. But it's been broken down into two distinct problems that you as a designer, as a developer, as a leader, need to be able to name. Now let's start with the first villain of our story, and that's the cognitive barrier. Now, a cognitive barrier is a wall, quite literally. It's an obstacle that physically prevents a user from moving forward. Now that's the point where they stop and say, well, I don't know what to do next. But think about it in three ways. First, the number of steps. But a 10-step prep crystal clear process is infinitely better than a single monstrous step that is confusing as anything. Now that barrier isn't a number. It's the perception of a giant wall that you have to scale as the user. Second, the length of those steps. Now a user expects to find more time on a mortgage application than they would ordering a pizza. Now, if your pizza app feels like a mortgage application, then you've essentially just built a barrier. You've violated their expectation of effort. So the value versus expectation also is probably mismatched as well. And third, the difficulty of steps. Now, is your language confusing? Are you using insider jargon? A simple step can become an impossible barrier if the user doesn't understand what you're asking, or they don't understand the signposts that are directing them to where they really can find what they're looking for. Now think of a login screen with two buttons, online banking and credit cards. Or what if you want to check your mortgage? You see you're frozen. That's a barrier. So a barrier is a wall. It stops progress. So that's what cognitive barriers are. Now let's talk about its sneaky cousin, right? It's relative, cognitive load. Now if a barrier is a wall, cognitive load is the weight. Now it's the amount of mental energy, the sheer brain power that a person, a human, a user has to burn to accomplish their goal on your platform. Now they can move forward, but you see, you're making it exhausting for them to do so. You're wearing them out. Now we can break this weight down into three parts as well. First, the number of choices. Even though there are many different environments where you can have lots of navigation options, or perhaps very little, it depends on the environment. And what I always recommend is that do extensive studies, usability studies, to make sure that users have expectations that match the environment, and an environment that, as we mentioned, can of course match their expectations. So if it's a 10-step process and that's their expectation, that's okay. And sometimes that principle can also apply when it comes to things such as navigation to a degree. However, you do have to understand that there is a number of choices that automatically increases the amount of weight, load. Now, if you haven't given customers freedom, what you've done is that you've eventually given them a £50 backpack. Now they have to evaluate every single choice, and this mental tax drains their will to continue, so they eventually just abandon. Second, the amount of thought required. Now, are your icons standardized, or are they clever? Perhaps too clever. You see, clever makes people think. Too clever, well, gets them lost. Now, standard lets them act. Are your layouts familiar? The more a user has to consciously process your design, the heavier the cognitive load will get. A longer experience can actually have a lower cognitive load if each step is mindless and easy. So we're talking about one that doesn't create lots of thought process, doesn't drain the brain. And even if it's longer, that's still okay. Now, third, the level of confusion. Now this happens when choices are unclear or incomplete. If you show a sort by filter, for example, but hide the most logical option under an advanced tab, then you're basically creating confusion. The user has to stop and think and wonder, well, am I missing something? That hesitation, that doubt. See, that's the weight of cognitive load. So let's put it all together. A barrier is a wall. The user cannot proceed. A load is a weight. The user can proceed, but it's hard work. Why is this not just semantics? Why is this the most important distinction you need to care about? So for designers, this is your new toolkit, because you're no longer a pixel pusher, you're an architect of thought. Now when a user fails, you can now diagnose why. Did they hit a wall, or did they just collapse from the weight? And with the different types of technology that are now at our fingertips, we have the potential to be able to do so much more. Perhaps as professionals, we can start to develop as UX generalists and embrace the world of artificial intelligence as it's known today, and use that to enhance our skill sets to start to develop solutions in different types of environments, even interfaceless solutions. This is why having this understanding is so important as a foundation for us. Now, if they hit a barrier, your solution is to provide a door, simplify the language, break down the step, or manage their expectations. And if they're overloaded, your solution is to lighten the load, reduce the choices, use familiar patterns, and provide clarity. Innovate where you can, standardize where it's best. This is how you build experiences that feel less like a chore and more like an extension of the user's own mind. Now, for leaders in the room, managers, directors, the VPs, why should you care? Well, because your designers have been speaking the right language, but you might not have been hearing it correctly. When a designer says, we need to reduce the number of choices in the navigation, what a leader should hear is, we need to lower the cognitive load to reduce decision paralysis and increase user momentum toward the checkout page. Now, of course, when it comes to storytelling or the right kind of communication, designers or anyone in the design or creative realm can go a step further by learning to speak some of the language of the business as well. So this is where two groups meet in the middle and everybody wins. Another example, when designers say users are confused by the jargon on this form, what a leader should hear perhaps is, we've built a cognitive barrier that is directly responsible for 30% of form abandonments. Now, fixing it is a direct path to, of course, higher conversions. Now, when you as a leader understand the difference between a wall and a weight, you empower your team to stop talking about making it pop and start talking about removing concrete obstacles that impacts the bottom line. Now, you give them the vocabulary to connect their design decisions to business KPIs. You bridge the gap between the design studio and the boardroom. Now, this isn't just about making things pretty. This is about making things work. And not just work, but work in a way that feels effortless, intuitive, and respectful of the user's mental energy. So I want you to go back and look at that drop-off point again in your analytics. Ask yourself, did your user hit a wall you built? Or did you hand them a weight too heavy to carry? Because the moment you can answer that question is the moment you stop just being a designer and you start becoming a true advocate for the user. And that right there is one of the ways of how you can win. Thanks for watching. Stay present, stay curious, and I'll see you next time.